Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I've been a long-haul trucker for about 7 years now, and I've driven through nearly every stretch of desolate highway this country has to offer. Route 95 through Nevada is one of those roads that makes you feel small. It's just you, the asphalt, and miles of empty desert under a sky so dark it feels like it's pressing down on you. Most nights, I don't mind the isolation. I put on a podcast, crack open an energy drink, and let the hum of the engine carry me through. But that night I learned that being alone isn't always the worst thing that can happen. Sometimes, it's who you find in the middle of nowhere that changes everything. It was around 2 in the morning when I saw her. I'd been driving for maybe 6 hours straight, and my eyes were starting to burn from staring at the endless road. The desert stretched out on both sides, flat and dark, with nothing but the occasional Joshua tree breaking up the horizon. My headlights carved a tunnel through the blackness, and for a while, that was all there was. Just light and shadow and the low rumble of my truck. Then I saw movement up ahead. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote or something that had wandered onto the road. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. A woman, standing on the shoulder, waving her arms above her head like she was trying to flag me down. My first instinct was to slow down. Out here, if someone's stranded, they're in serious trouble. There's no cell service for miles, and the nearest town is at least an hour away. I eased off the gas and started to pull over, my rig groaning as it slowed. But something stopped me from coming to a complete stop. Maybe it was the way she was standing, too still, too rigid, like she was waiting for something. Or maybe it was the fact that there was no car anywhere near her. No broken-down vehicle on the side of the road, no emergency lights, nothing. Just her, alone in the middle of the desert, waving at me with this slow, deliberate motion. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, trying to get a better look at her face, but the angle of my headlights made it hard to see. All I could make out was a pale dress, long dark hair, and those arms moving up and down in a rhythm that felt wrong. I don't know why, but I didn't stop. I eased back onto the gas and kept driving. As I passed her, I glanced in my side mirror, expecting to see her drop her arms, maybe shout after me or something. But she didn't. She just kept waving, same motion, same speed, like I hadn't passed her at all. I told myself it was probably someone who'd gotten lost, maybe high or confused, and that I'd call it in at the next truck stop. But the image of her stayed with me, those slow mechanical waves, the way she didn't move her body, just her arms. About 10 minutes later, I saw her again. Same spot, same pose, same waving motion. My heart kicked in my chest, and I slammed on the brakes without thinking. The truck screeched to a halt, and I sat there, staring into the side mirror. She was behind me now, maybe 100 yards back, still waving. I told myself it was impossible. I'd just passed her. There was no way she could have gotten ahead of me again, not unless she'd run, and even then, I would have seen her in my mirrors. But there she was. I grabbed my CB radio and tried to hail another driver, anyone who might be on the same stretch of road. Static crackled back at me. I switched channels, tried again. Nothing. My phone had no signal. Hadn't had one for the last hour. I was completely alone out here, and that woman was still behind me, waving. I put the truck back in gear and drove. Faster this time. I didn't care about speed limits or fuel efficiency. I just wanted to put as much distance between me and her as possible. But it didn't matter. Every few miles, I'd see her again. Sometimes on the left side of the road, sometimes on the right. Always in the same pale dress, always waving with that same slow, unnatural rhythm. And every time I passed her, I'd check my mirrors and she'd still be there, waving, like she hadn't moved at all. It was like the road was looping, like I was stuck in some kind of nightmare where no matter how far I drove, I couldn't escape her. By the fourth time I saw her, I was starting to lose it. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and I could feel sweat running down the back of my neck despite the cold air blasting from the AC. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was multiple women, some kind of prank, or maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. There was something wrong with her, something that didn't belong on that road. The fifth time I saw her, she was closer, not on the shoulder anymore, but standing in the middle of the lane, right in the path of my headlights. I had maybe 3 seconds to react. I swerved hard to the left, my tires screaming as the truck skidded across the asphalt. I thought I was going to flip, thought I was going to roll right off the road and into the desert. But somehow, I managed to straighten out. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my breath came in short, ragged gasps. I looked in the mirror, expecting to see her standing there, waving. But she was gone. For the first time in over an hour, the road behind me was empty. I didn't slow down, I didn't stop. I kept my foot on the gas and drove until I hit the truck stop just outside of Tonopah. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, the sun was starting to rise, painting the desert in shades of orange and pink. I sat in my cab for a long time, just staring at the horizon, trying to convince myself that it had all been in my head. But when I climbed out of the truck to stretch my legs, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the passenger side door, were handprints. Small, pale handprints, pressed into the dust like someone had been leaning against the truck. And they weren't just on the door, they were all along the side of the trailer, dozens of them, trailing back as far as I could see, like she'd been running alongside me the whole time, keeping pace, waiting for me to stop. I didn't report it. I didn't tell anyone. I just wiped off the handprints with a rag and got back on the road. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through the desert, I still see her in my mirrors. Just for a second, just long enough to make my heart stop. And every time, she's waving. I was driving cross-country from Phoenix to Albuquerque, taking the back roads because I hate interstate traffic. It was one of those trips where you leave late, thinking you'll beat the heat, but end up driving through the dead of night instead. Route 60 cuts through some of the emptiest parts of Arizona, long stretches of desert where the only signs of life are the occasional gas station or roadside cross-marking where someone didn't make it. It was around midnight when I started to get hungry. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and my stomach was making noises that told me I couldn't wait until Albuquerque. I kept my eyes open for any sign of civilization. A diner, a convenience store, anything. But there was nothing. Just darkness and the occasional jackrabbit darting across the road. Then I saw it, a sign lit up in flickering neon, advertising Rosie's Diner, open 24 hours. I almost didn't believe it. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, a 24-hour diner seemed too good to be true. But my stomach overruled my skepticism, and I pulled off the highway onto a dirt-access road. The diner sat about a quarter mile off the main road, a squat little building with peeling paint and a gravel parking lot. There were no other cars, which didn't surprise me. Who else would be out here at this hour? I parked near the entrance and killed the engine. The silence that followed was oppressive, the kind that makes you aware of every little sound. The tick of the cooling engine, the crunch of gravel under my boots as I stepped out, the distant hum of the neon sign. The diner's windows were fogged up and I couldn't see inside. But the lights were on and the open sign was glowing, so I pushed through the front door. The inside was exactly what you'd expect from a roadside diner. Vinyl booths, a long counter with red stools, a jukebox in the corner that wasn't playing anything. The air smelled like grease and old coffee, and the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like angry insects. But what struck me most was how empty it was. Not a single customer, not even a waitress behind the counter. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. No response. I stood there for a moment, debating whether I should just leave, but my hunger kept me rooted in place. Maybe the staff was in the back, I told myself. Maybe they didn't hear me come in. I walked over to one of the booths and sat down, the vinyl squeaking under my weight. There was a menu on the table, laminated and sticky, advertising the usual diner fare: burgers, fries, breakfast, all day. I picked it up and flipped through it, trying to ignore the growing unease in my chest. The pages were yellowed and brittle, like they hadn't been updated in decades. Some of the prices were absurdly low. $1.50 for a cheeseburger, 0.5 for coffee. I figured it was just an old menu they hadn't bothered to replace. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the back of the diner. I looked up, expecting to see a waitress or a cook, someone who could explain why the place was so deserted. Instead, I saw a woman in a faded pink uniform, her hair tied back in a bun, walking toward me with a notepad in her hand. She didn't smile, didn't greet me, just stood next to my booth and stared down at me with blank, glassy eyes. "What'll it be?" she asked, her voice flat and monotone. There was something off about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Her skin was too pale, almost gray, and there were dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept in days. But I was hungry, and I didn't want to be rude, so I ordered a burger and fries and a coffee. She wrote it down without saying a word, then turned and walked back toward the kitchen. I watched her go, noticing the way she moved. Stiff, jerky, like her joints didn't quite work right. The door to the kitchen swung shut behind her, and I was alone again. I pulled out my phone to check the time, but there was no signal. Not even a single bar. I wasn't surprised. Out here, cell service was a luxury. The minutes dragged on. 5 minutes, 10, 15. I started to wonder if she'd forgotten about my order, or if maybe the kitchen was closed and she hadn't bothered to tell me. I was about to get up and leave when the kitchen door swung open, and she walked out carrying a plate. She set it down in front of me without a word. A burger, fries, and a cup of coffee that looked like it had been sitting on a burner for hours. "Thanks," I said, but she didn't respond. She just turned and walked back to the counter, where she stood with her back to me, staring at the wall. I looked down at the food. The burger was gray and greasy, the fries limp and cold. The coffee was thick and black, with an oily sheen on the surface. It didn't look appetizing, but I was starving, so I picked up the burger and took a bite. It tasted like nothing. Not bad, not good. Just nothing, like I was chewing on cardboard. I forced myself to swallow and tried the fries, but they were the same. Flavorless, lifeless. Even the coffee was tasteless, just hot water with a faint, burnt smell. I set everything down and looked around the diner again, suddenly aware of how wrong everything felt. The silence, the empty booths, the waitress standing motionless at the counter. It was like the whole place was frozen in time. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked toward the door. I didn't care about paying. I just wanted to get out. But as I reached for the handle, I heard her voice behind me. "You didn't finish your meal." I turned around slowly. She was standing in the middle of the diner now, staring at me with those same glassy eyes. But this time, there was something else in her expression. Something cold and hungry. "I'm not hungry anymore," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You didn't finish your meal," she repeated, her voice a little louder now, a little sharper. "You have to finish your meal." I didn't wait to hear what would happen if I didn't. I shoved the door open and ran to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them, picked them up, and finally got the door open. I threw myself inside and locked the doors, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, spinning out of the parking lot and back onto the dirt road. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down until I was back on the highway, miles away from that diner. When I finally pulled over to catch my breath, I checked my rearview mirror. The road behind me was dark and empty. But I swear, just for a second, I saw the glow of that neon sign in the distance, flickering on and off like a dying heartbeat. I've driven that route a dozen times since then, always during the day. I've never seen that diner again. No sign, no building, nothing. It's like it was never there. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through the desert, I catch a whiff of grease and burnt coffee. And I have to remind myself to keep my eyes on the road and not look for that flickering neon sign. Because if I see it again, I don't know if I'll be able to drive past. Truck stops are weird places after midnight. They're like little islands of light and noise in an ocean of darkness, filled with people who don't quite belong anywhere. You've got truckers trying to catch a few hours of sleep, travelers who took a wrong turn somewhere, and the occasional drifter who looks like they've been on the road for way too long. I've always felt safe in truck stops, though. There's something about being surrounded by other people, even strangers, that makes the isolation of the highway feel less suffocating. But that night, at a truck stop just outside of Barstow, California, I learned that safety is an illusion. Sometimes, the most dangerous places are the ones where you let your guard down. I'd been driving for about 8 hours, hauling freight from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, and I needed to take a break. My back was killing me, and I'd been fighting to keep my eyes open for the last hour. The truck stop was one of those big chain places, bright lights, clean bathroom, a convenience store stocked with snacks and energy drinks. I pulled into the parking lot, grabbed my wallet, and headed inside. The place was busier than I expected. A few truckers were milling around the coffee station, a family with kids was buying snacks, and a couple of guys in construction gear were arguing over a map. I grabbed a bottle of water and a bag of chips, paid at the counter, and then made my way to the bathroom. I figured I'd splash some cold water on my face, maybe take a quick break before getting back on the road. The bathroom was at the back of the building, down a long hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and stale air. It was one of those single-occupant bathrooms with a heavy door and a lock that clicked loudly when you turned it. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, locking it behind me. The fluorescent light overhead flickered for a second before settling into a steady, harsh glow. I set my water bottle on the edge of the sink and leaned over, splashing cold water on my face. That's when I heard it. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the door. I froze, water dripping from my chin, and stared at the door. Maybe someone else needed to use the bathroom, I thought. It happens. I called out, "Occupied," and waited for the footsteps to move away. But they didn't. Instead, there was another knock. 3 more slow, deliberate knocks, harder this time. I straightened up, wiping my face with a paper towel, and stared at the door. "I said it's occupied," I called out, a little louder now, a little more annoyed. Silence. I waited, listening for footsteps, for the sound of someone walking away. But there was nothing. Just the hum of the fluorescent light and the faint drip of water from the faucet. Then the handle started to turn, slowly, deliberately, like someone was testing to see if it was locked. My heart kicked in my chest, and I took a step back. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the tiles. "Someone's in. Here." The handle stopped moving, but the door didn't open. It was locked, I'd made sure of it, but the handle kept turning, back and forth like someone was trying to force it. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to unlock the door and confront whoever was out there, tell them to back off and find another bathroom, but something in my gut told me that was a bad idea. So I just stood there, watching the handle move, my pulse pounding in my ears. After what felt like forever, the handle stopped. The hallway outside went silent again. I waited, counting the seconds, trying to calm my breathing. Maybe it was just some drunk asshole messing with me, I told myself. Maybe they'd given up and moved on. But then I heard breathing. Slow, heavy breathing, like someone was standing right on the other side of the door, their face pressed against the wood. I could hear them inhaling and exhaling, deep and rhythmic, like they were savoring the moment. My skin crawled, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. "Get the fuck away from the door!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear and anger. The breathing stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy footsteps, moving away from the door and down the hallway. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, then counted to 10 before unlocking the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. I pulled the door open a crack and peered out into the hallway. It was empty. No one was there. I stepped out, my legs feeling like jelly, and looked both ways. The hallway was deserted, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. I walked quickly back toward the main area of the truck stop, my heart still racing. When I got there, I scanned the crowd, looking for anyone who seemed out of place, anyone who might have been the person outside the bathroom. But everyone looked normal. Truckers, travelers, families. No one was paying attention to me. I didn't stick around. I grabbed my water bottle, which I'd left on the sink in my panic, and headed straight for my truck. As I walked across the parking lot, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. But the lot was empty, just rows of parked trucks and a few cars scattered here and there. I climbed into my cab, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. I told myself it was nothing, just some weirdo trying to scare me. But as I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing at the edge of the parking lot, half hidden in the shadows, was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and he was staring at me. Even from that distance, I could see the way he was standing, perfectly still, his head tilted slightly to the side, like he was studying me. And then, just before I turned onto the highway, he raised one hand and waved. Slow, deliberate, the same way the woman on Route 95 had waved. I floored it, my tires screeching as I merged onto the highway. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached Las Vegas, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I still use truck stops, but I never use the bathroom alone anymore. And I never, ever ignore that feeling in my gut that tells me something's wrong. I don't pick up hitchhikers. It's a rule I've had since I started driving long haul, and it's one I've never broken. You hear too many stories. People getting robbed, assaulted, worse. The desert highways are full of desperate people, and desperation makes folks do things they wouldn't normally do. So when I saw the guy standing on the side of Route 93 in Nevada, thumb out, duffel bag at his feet, my first instinct was to keep driving. But something made me slow down. Maybe it was the way he was standing, calm, patient, like he'd been waiting for me specifically. Or maybe it was the fact that it was 3 in the morning and I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. Either way, I pulled over. He was average looking, maybe in his late 30s with sandy hair and a worn leather jacket. He didn't look dangerous, just tired, like he'd been walking for a long time. When I rolled down my window, he smiled. A friendly, easy smile that put me at ease. "Thanks for stopping," he said, his voice soft and polite. "I've been out here for hours. Thought I was going to have to walk the whole way." "Where are you headed?" I asked, still hesitant. "Las Vegas," he said. "Just need a ride to the city limits." I can find my way from there. Las Vegas was about 2 hours away, and it was on my route anyway. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door and told him to get in. He tossed his duffel bag in the back and climbed into the cab, settling into the seat with a sigh of relief. "I really appreciate this," he said, buckling his seatbelt. "Not many people stop out here. You're a good guy." I nodded, pulling back onto the highway. We drove in silence for a while, and I kept stealing glances at him out of the corner of my eye. He seemed normal enough, just a guy who'd had some bad luck, but there was something about him that made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he sat, too still, too quiet, like he was waiting for something, or maybe it was the way he kept looking at me, not in a threatening way, but like he was studying me, memorizing every detail. After about 20 minutes, he spoke. "You ever get lonely out here? Driving all night, I mean. Just you and the road." "Sometimes," I said, keeping my eyes on the highway. "You get used to it." "I bet you do," he said, and there was something in his voice that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "But it's nice to have company, isn't it? Someone to talk to." I didn't respond. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel a little tighter than before. The desert stretched out on both sides of us, dark and endless, and for the first time that night, I felt truly alone, even with him sitting right next to me. "You know," he said, his voice still soft and conversational, "I think we've met before." I glanced at him, frowning. "I don't think so. I'm pretty good with faces." "Are you?" he asked, smiling. "Because I'm pretty sure we've met. I never forget a face. Especially not yours." My heart started to beat faster, and I felt a cold knot of fear forming in my stomach. "I think you've got me confused with someone else," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "I don't think so. What was it?" "Oh, right. You're David." I almost slammed on the brakes. I didn't tell him my name. I never told him my name. My hands were shaking now, and I could feel sweat starting to bead on my forehead. "How do you know my name?" I demanded, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. He didn't answer right away. He just sat there, staring at me with that same calm, easy smile. Then he said, "Lucky guess." "Bullshit," I said, my voice rising. "How the hell do you know my name?" He leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms over his chest, and looked out the window. "You'd be surprised what you can learn about a person just by watching them," he said. "The way they drive, the way they carry themselves. You're an open book, David." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how he knew my name, how he could have possibly known. I hadn't told him, I was sure of it. And even if I had, though I knew I hadn't, there was no reason for him to bring it up like that, like it was some kind of game. "I think you should get out," I said, my voice low and tense. "Out?" he asked, turning to look at me. "But we're in the middle of nowhere. You wouldn't just leave me out here, would you?" "Yeah," I said, my jaw clenched. "I would." He laughed, a low, soft sound that sent chills down my spine. "You're not going to do that," he said. "You're too nice. That's why you stopped for me in the first place. Because you're a good guy. You don't leave people stranded." I didn't respond. I just kept driving, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to pull over and kick him out, but part of me was too scared to stop. What if he didn't leave? What if he tried something? Out here, in the middle of the desert, there was no one to help me. No one would even know if something happened. "You know what I think?" he said, his voice taking on a strange, almost dreamy quality. "I think you and I were meant to meet, out here on this road at this exact moment. Don't you think that's interesting?" "No," I said flatly. "I don't." He chuckled. "You will." We drove in silence for a while after that, and I kept my eyes glued to the road, refusing to look at him, but I could feel him watching me, could feel his eyes boring into the side of my head. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity, and I started counting down the miles to Las Vegas. Just another hour, I told myself. Just another hour, and I can drop him off and never see him again. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You know, David, son, I've been thinking about your wife. Sarah, right? And your daughter, what was her name again? Emily?" I slammed on the brakes so hard that the truck skidded across the highway, tires screeching. We came to a stop in the middle of the road, and I turned to him, my hands shaking with rage and fear. "How the fuck do you know their names?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the cab. He just smiled, that same calm, easy smile. "Like I said, you're an open book." I didn't think. I just reacted. I reached across and grabbed him by the collar, pulling him toward me. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper now, trembling with fear. He didn't flinch. He just looked at me with those calm, empty eyes and said, "Someone who's been watching you for a long time." I shoved him back and reached for the door handle, throwing it open. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking. "Get the fuck out of my truck." He didn't argue. He just unbuckled his seatbelt, grabbed his duffel bag from the back, and climbed out. He stood on the side of the road, looking at me through the open door, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he leaned in, just slightly, and said, "See you around, David." I slammed the door shut and floored it, leaving him standing there in the middle of the desert. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached Las Vegas, and even then I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me, still out there somewhere. I reported it to the police, but they didn't find anything. No record of anyone matching his description. No reports of anyone going missing or causing trouble in the area. It was like he'd never existed. But I know he was real. I know he knew my name, knew my wife's name, knew my daughter's name. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through the desert, I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for me to stop again. Rest stops are supposed to be safe. They're these little oases on the highway where you can stretch your legs, use a clean bathroom, maybe grab a vending machine snack before getting back on the road. I've stopped at hundreds of them over the years, and they're all pretty much the same. Parking lots, picnic tables, information boards with maps of the area. Boring, but functional. That's why I didn't think twice about pulling into the rest stop on Interstate 40, somewhere between Flagstaff and Albuquerque. It was around 1 in the morning, and I needed to take a break before I fell asleep at the wheel. The rest stop was small, just a bathroom building and a few parking spaces surrounded by desert scrub. There were no other cars, which wasn't unusual for that time of night. I parked near the entrance, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, enjoying the silence. The desert was quiet, almost unnaturally so, and the only light came from a single flickering street lamp near the bathroom building. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment, always a good idea to have one in the desert, and stepped out of the truck. The air was cold, colder than I expected, and it smelled like dust and sage. I stretched, feeling my back crack, and made my way toward the bathroom. The building was small and squat, made of cinder blocks with 2 doors. One marked men, and the other marked women. I pushed open the men's door and stepped inside. The bathroom was clean, surprisingly so, with white tiles and a row of sinks along one wall. But it was freezing in there, and the lights overhead were flickering, casting strange shadows on the walls. I did my business quickly, washed my hands, and headed back outside. But when I pushed open the door, something felt wrong. The parking lot looked different. It took me a second to realize what it was. My truck was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty space where I'd parked, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. I walked over to where I'd left it, looking around, thinking maybe I'd just parked in a different spot and forgotten. But no, this was definitely the right place. I could see the tire tracks in the gravel. My heart started to pound, and I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, not even a single bar. I looked around the rest stop, hoping to see someone, anyone who could help me. But the place was deserted. No cars, no people, nothing. Just me and the flickering street lamp and the endless desert stretching out in every direction. I walked around the parking lot, shining my flashlight into the darkness, calling out for help. But my voice just echoed back at me, swallowed up by the silence. I checked the bathroom again, thinking maybe someone had moved my truck as some kind of prank. But the bathroom was empty, just like before. I walked over to the information board, hoping to find a phone number or some kind of emergency contact. But the board was blank. Not faded, not weathered, just blank, like it had never had anything on it. That's when I noticed the road, or rather, the lack of it. I'd driven in from the highway, I was sure of it. But when I looked toward where the entrance should have been, all I saw was desert. No road, no tire tracks, no sign that a highway had ever been there. It was like the rest stop had just appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the desert. I started to panic. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, and I could feel my chest tightening. This didn't make sense. None of this made sense. I tried to retrace my steps, tried to figure out where I'd gone wrong, but my mind was racing too fast to think clearly. I walked to the edge of the parking lot where the asphalt met the desert and shone my flashlight out into the darkness. Nothing, just sand and scrub and rocks stretching out forever. I decided to walk. If there was no road, I'd just walk back the way I came. I could navigate by the stars, find the highway, flag down another driver. It was a long shot, but it was better than standing here doing nothing. I picked a direction that felt right and started walking, my flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness. The desert was silent, not even the sound of insects or wind, just my footsteps crunching on the gravel. I walked for what felt like hours, but when I looked back, the rest stop was still there, just as close as it had been when I started. I stopped, staring at it, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. I'd been walking in a straight line, I was sure of it, but somehow I hadn't moved. I tried again, picking a different direction this time, walking faster, practically jogging. But no matter how far I went, the rest stop stayed the same distance away, like it was tethered to me, following me no matter where I went. I collapsed onto the ground, my legs giving out beneath me, and sat there in the dirt, trying to catch my breath. My phone was useless, my truck was gone, and I was trapped in some kind of loop that didn't make any sense. I looked up at the sky, hoping to see stars, some point of reference, but the sky was black. Not dark, not cloudy. Black, like someone had painted over it with ink. I don't know how long I sat there. Time felt strange, like it was moving too fast and too slow at the same time. Eventually, I stood up and walked back to the rest stop. There was nowhere else to go. I sat down on one of the picnic tables, my flashlight resting beside me, and waited. For what, I didn't know. For the sun to rise, maybe, or for someone to show up and tell me this was all some kind of mistake. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the direction of the bathroom. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the building, my heart hammering in my chest. A figure stepped out from the shadows, a man, tall and thin, wearing a uniform that looked like a park ranger's. He walked toward me with slow, measured steps, and as he got closer, I could see his face. It was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were sunken and hollow like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Trouble sleeping?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. "What?" I said, my voice shaking. "No, my truck is gone. I need help." He tilted his head. studying me with those hollow eyes. "Truck?" "Yes," I said, standing up. "I parked right there, and now it's gone. I need to call someone, but there's no signal, and I can't find the road." "There is no road," he said, cutting me off. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Not anymore." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my fear giving way to anger. "I drove here. There was a road. There has to be a road." He just stared at me for a long moment, then said, "You should go back to sleep." "I'm not asleep," I shouted. "I'm standing right here. I'm awake." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Are you?" And then he turned and walked back toward the bathroom, disappearing into the shadows. I ran after him, shouting for him to come back, but when I reached the bathroom, it was empty. No ranger. No sign that anyone had been there. I searched the entire building, checked every stall, but there was nothing. I don't remember what happened after that. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my truck, parked in the same rest stop, the sun just starting to rise over the desert. My head was pounding and my mouth was dry like I'd been asleep for days. I looked around, disoriented, trying to piece together what had happened, but everything seemed normal. The parking lot, the bathroom, the road leading back to the highway. It was all there, just like it should have been. I started the engine and drove away, not looking back. I told myself it was a dream, that I'd fallen asleep and imagined the whole thing. But when I checked my phone, I saw the time. It was 6 a.m. I'd stopped at the rest stop at 1 a.m. That meant I'd been there for 5 hours, and I had no memory of any of it, except for the ranger and the black sky and the rest stop that had no exit. I've driven past that rest stop a few times since then, always during the day. It looks normal, just another rest stop on the highway. But I've never stopped there again, and I never will. Running out of gas in the desert is one of those fears that every driver has. It's up there with getting a flat tire or breaking down in the middle of nowhere. I've always been careful about keeping my tank full, especially on long stretches of highway where gas stations are few and far between. But that night on Route 50 in Nevada, they call it the loneliest road in America, and for good reason, I cut it too close. I'd been driving for hours, and my fuel gauge had been sitting on E for the last 20 miles. I kept telling myself I'd see a gas station soon, that there had to be one somewhere up ahead. But the road just kept going, mile after mile of empty highway, and my anxiety grew with every passing minute. Finally, just when I was about to accept that I'd have to pull over and call for a tow, I saw it, a single light in the distance, glowing like a beacon in the darkness. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a gas station, one of those old-fashioned places with a single pump and a small building that looked like it had been there since the 1950s. The neon sign above the door was flickering, advertising gas, food, lodging, though I doubted they had much of any of those things. But I didn't care. I just needed gas. I pulled up to the pump and killed the engine, which sputtered and died with a final, pathetic cough. I sat there for a moment, relief washing over me, and then I stepped out of the car. The air was cold and still, and the only sound was the hum of the neon sign and the distant howl of the wind. I walked over to the pump and grabbed the nozzle, but when I tried to start it, nothing happened. No click, no whir, nothing. I tried again, jiggling the handle, but it was dead. I looked around, hoping to see an attendant, someone who could help me get the pump working. The building next to the pump had a light on inside, and through the grimy windows I could see rows of shelves stocked with faded products, but there was no one behind the counter. I walked over to the door and pushed it open, a bell jingling above my head as I stepped inside. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the small space. No response. The inside of the building was exactly what I expected. Dusty shelves, a counter with an old-fashioned cash register, a few racks of chips and candy that looked like they'd been there for decades. But no attendant. I walked up to the counter and rang the bell sitting next to the register. The sound was sharp and jarring in the silence, but still no one came. I waited for a few minutes, growing more impatient by the second. Finally, I leaned over the counter and called out again. "Hey, is anyone here? I need gas." That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere in the back of the building. I straightened up, relieved, and waited for the attendant to appear. The door behind the counter swung open, and a man stepped out. He was old, maybe in his 70s, with thin white hair and a face that was lined and weathered like old leather. He was wearing a grease-stained jumpsuit and a name tag that said, Earl. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice scratchy and hoarse. "Didn't hear you come in." "No problem," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. "I need gas, but the pump isn't working." He nodded slowly, like he'd heard this 1,000 times before. "Yeah, it does that sometimes. I'll have to turn it on for you manually. Give me a minute." He shuffled past me and out the door, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who had all the time in the world. I followed him outside and watched as he walked over to the pump and opened a panel on the side. He fiddled with something inside, muttering to himself, and then closed the panel and straightened up. "Try it now," he said. I walked over to the pump and grabbed the nozzle again. This time, when I squeezed the handle, I heard a click, and the pump whirred to life. I let out a sigh of relief and started filling my tank. Earl stood next to me, his hands in his pockets, staring out at the desert. "Don't get many people out here this time of night," he said, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear him. "I bet," I said, keeping my eyes on the pump. The numbers on the display were ticking up slowly, and I found myself counting down the seconds until my tank was full. "You in a hurry?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Long drive ahead of me." He nodded, still staring out at the desert. "Lot of folks come through here in a hurry. Never stop to talk. Never stop to appreciate where they are." I glanced at him, unsure of how to respond. There was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the way he stood, too still, too rigid, or the way his voice sounded flat and emotionless. But I didn't want to be rude, so I just nodded and said, "Yeah, well, I've got a long way to go." The pump clicked, signaling that my tank was full. I hung up the nozzle and pulled out my wallet. "How much do I owe you?" He didn't answer right away. He just kept staring out at the desert like he hadn't heard me. I repeated the question, a little louder this time, and he finally turned to look at me. His eyes were strange, pale and glassy, like they weren't really seeing me. "No charge," he said. I frowned. "What?" "No charge," he repeated, his voice still flat. "You don't owe me anything." "Are you sure?" I asked, confused. "I mean, I can pay." "I said no charge," he said, his tone taking on a sharp edge. "Now get out of here, before it gets dark." I looked around. It was already dark. It had been dark since I'd arrived, but something in his voice made me not want to argue. I stuffed my wallet back in my pocket and nodded. "Okay, thanks." I walked back to my car, glancing over my shoulder as I did. Earl was still standing by the pump, watching me. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, which roared to life without any issues. As I pulled away from the gas station, I looked in my rearview mirror. Earl was still standing there, motionless, his pale eyes fixed on my car, and then, just as I was about to turn back onto the highway, the lights went out. The neon sign, the light inside the building, even the light from the pump. Everything went dark all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. I slowed down, my headlights cutting through the darkness, and looked back. The gas station was gone. Not just dark, but gone, like it had never been there in the first place. I stopped the car, my heart pounding, and stared at the empty stretch of desert where the station had been just seconds ago. There was nothing there. No building, no pump, no sign. Just darkness and silence. I didn't stick around to figure it out. I floored it, my tires kicking up dust as I merged back onto the highway. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, about an hour away, and even then, I couldn't shake the image of Earl standing by the pump, watching me with those pale, glassy eyes. I've driven Route 50 a few times since then, always during the day. I've never seen that gas station again, and I'm not sure I want to. There's a certain kind of paranoia that sets in when you're driving alone at night through the desert. Every pair of headlights in your rearview mirror starts to feel suspicious, especially when the road is so empty that seeing another car feels like an event. Most of the time, it's nothing. Just another driver headed in the same direction, someone who happens to be going the same speed as you. But sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes those headlights follow you a little too closely, stay behind you a little too long, and you start to wonder if it's really just a coincidence. That's what happened to me on Highway 93, somewhere between Phoenix and Las Vegas. I'd been driving for about 4 hours, and I was starting to get tired. The highway was dark and empty, with nothing but desert on either side and the occasional cactus silhouetted against the night sky. I had the radio on low, playing some late-night talk show, but I wasn't really listening. I was just focused on the road, counting down the miles until I could pull over and get some sleep. That's when I noticed the headlights. They appeared in my rearview mirror suddenly, bright and close, like the car had come out of nowhere. I frowned, wondering where it had come from. I hadn't seen any other cars for miles, and there weren't any side roads or turnoffs in this area. But there it was, following me, maybe 50 yards back. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was just another driver who'd been going faster and had caught up to me. But as the minutes passed, I started to notice something strange. The car wasn't passing me. It was just following, staying the same distance behind, matching my speed exactly. When I sped up, it sped up. When I slowed down, it slowed down. It was like the driver was shadowing me, keeping pace no matter what I did. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was a highway after all. Lots of people drove at similar speeds, but the longer the car stayed behind me, the more uneasy I felt. I tried to get a look at it, to see what kind of car it was or who was driving, but the headlights were too bright. All I could see was the glare, blinding and unrelenting, filling my rear-view mirror. I decided to test my theory. I slowed down, dropping my speed from 70 to 60, then to 50. The car behind me slowed down too, maintaining the same distance. My heart started to beat faster, and I felt a cold knot of fear forming in my stomach. This wasn't a coincidence. Whoever was driving that car was following me, deliberately. I sped back up, pushing my speed to 80, hoping to lose them. But the car stayed right behind me, matching my speed effortlessly. I glanced at the road ahead, looking for a turnoff, a gas station, anywhere I could pull over and let them pass. But there was nothing, just miles of empty highway stretching out in front of me. I tried to stay calm, to think logically. Maybe it was just someone messing with me, some bored driver who thought it would be funny to tailgate a stranger. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. If they wanted to pass me, why didn't they just do it? The road was completely empty. There was nothing stopping them. I reached for my phone, thinking I'd call the police, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. I was completely alone out here, with no way to call for help, no way to escape the car that was following me. I kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The headlights stayed behind me, unrelenting, and I started to notice other things. The car never got any closer, but it never fell back either. It was like it was locked onto me, following my every move with perfect precision. There was something about the headlights that felt wrong. They were too bright, too intense, like they were designed to blind me, to keep me from seeing what was behind them. I decided to try something. There was a sharp curve coming up, one of those tight turns that you have to slow down for or risk flying off the road. I waited until the last possible second, then hit the brakes hard, slowing down to 30 miles an hour as I took the turn. My tires screeched, and I felt the car lurch to the side, but I made it through. I glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the car overshoot the turn or slam on their brakes. But no. The car took the turn perfectly, maintaining the same distance, the same speed, like they'd known exactly what I was going to do. That's when I really started to panic. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, and I could feel sweat running down the back of my neck. Whoever was driving that car knew what they were doing. They were good. Too good. And the fact that they were staying behind me, not trying to pass, not trying to force me off the road, made it worse. It was like they were playing with me, like they were enjoying watching me squirm. I kept driving, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about pulling over, confronting them, demanding to know what they wanted. But something told me that was a bad idea. Something told me that if I stopped, if I gave them the chance, things would get much worse. So I kept going. Mile after mile, the headlights stayed behind me, never wavering, never falling back. I lost track of time. It felt like I'd been driving for hours, though it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. The highway stretched out endlessly in front of me, and the desert on either side felt like a prison, trapping me in this nightmare with no way out. And then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, the headlights were gone. I glanced in my rearview mirror, my heart pounding, and saw nothing but darkness. The road behind me was empty. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop in the middle of the highway, and sat there, staring at the mirror, waiting for the headlights to reappear. But they didn't. The road was empty, completely empty. I sat there for a long time, my hands shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't understand what had just happened. Where had they gone? There were no turnoffs, no side roads, nothing. They'd just vanished, like they'd never been there at all. Eventually, I started driving again, slowly this time, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. But the road stayed empty. No headlights, no cars, nothing. Just me and the darkness and the endless stretch of highway. I drove the rest of the way to Las Vegas in a daze, barely able to process what had happened. And when I finally pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of the city, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the empty road behind me. I've never been able to explain what happened that night. I've told myself it was just another driver, that I was being paranoid, that there was a logical explanation. But I know what I saw. I know those headlights followed me for miles, matched my every move, and then disappeared without a trace. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through the desert, I still see them in my mirror. Just for a second. Just long enough to make my heart stop. You see a lot of weird things on desert highways, especially late at night. Roadkill, blown-out tires, the occasional piece of furniture that's fallen off a truck. But I'd never seen anything like what I found on Route 160, just south of Pahrump, Nevada. It was around 3 in the morning, and I was on my way back from a delivery in Las Vegas, heading home to Phoenix. The highway was empty, as it usually was at that hour, and I was half asleep, running on caffeine and autopilot. That's when I saw the car. It was sitting on the side of the road, just off the shoulder, its headlights on and its engine running. At first, I thought maybe someone had pulled over to take a break or check their phone. But as I got closer, I realized something was off. The car was completely still, no one moving inside, no one standing next to it. Just a car, sitting there with its lights on and its engine running in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down as I passed it, craning my neck to get a better look. It was an older model sedan, maybe from the early 2000s, dark blue or black. It was hard to tell in the darkness. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, like someone had gotten out in a hurry and forgotten to close it. But there was no one around. No one on the side of the road, no one walking toward the car. Just the car, sitting there, idling. I should have kept driving. I should have called it in and let the highway patrol deal with it. But something about the scene bothered me. Maybe it was the open door, or the fact that the engine was still running, or just the sheer wrongness of finding a car like that in the middle of the desert. Whatever it was, I pulled over onto the shoulder about 50 yards ahead and turned off my engine. I sat there for a moment, debating whether this was a good idea. Every instinct I had was telling me to just drive away, to leave the car where it was and let someone else deal with it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be in trouble. Maybe the driver had gotten out to check something and wandered off, gotten lost or hurt. Maybe they needed help. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of my truck. The air was cold and still, and the only sounds were the hum of the idling car and the distant howl of the wind. I walked slowly toward the sedan, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, and called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No response. I reached the car and shone my flashlight through the windows. The interior was empty. No driver, no passengers, no sign that anyone had been there recently. But the engine was definitely running, and the headlights were on, casting long beams of light across the desert. I walked around to the driver's side, where the door was hanging open, and leaned in to take a closer look. The keys were still in the ignition, the radio was off, and there were no personal belongings inside. No phone, no wallet, no bags. It was like whoever had been driving had just gotten out and walked away, leaving everything behind. I reached in and turned off the engine, and the sudden silence was almost deafening. I stood there for a moment, listening, waiting for some kind of explanation. But there was nothing. Just the wind and the darkness and the empty car. I walked around the vehicle, shining my flashlight on the ground, looking for footprints or some sign of where the driver had gone. But the ground was hard-packed dirt and gravel, and I couldn't see any tracks. I called out again, louder this time, hoping that maybe the driver was nearby, just out of sight. But there was no response. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but as I stood there, it grew stronger. It was a sweet, sickly smell, like rotting meat mixed with something chemical. I covered my nose with my hand and walked toward the back of the car, following the smell. When I reached the trunk, I stopped. The smell was coming from there, no doubt about it. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the trunk release. Part of me didn't want to know what was inside. Part of me wanted to get back in my truck and drive away as fast as I could. But I couldn't leave without checking. If there was someone in there, someone who needed help, I had to know. I popped the trunk and stepped back, shining my flashlight inside. It was empty, completely empty. No body, no bags, nothing. But the smell was overwhelming, pouring out of the trunk like a wave, making my eyes water. I slammed the trunk shut and stepped back, gagging, trying to catch my breath. Whatever had been in there, it was gone now. But the smell lingered, clinging to me like a greasy film. I walked back to the driver's side and looked at the car one more time. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was a piece of paper on the dashboard, folded in half. I reached in and picked it up, unfolding it carefully. It was a handwritten note, scrawled in shaky, uneven letters. It said, "Don't stop. Keep driving. They're watching." My blood ran cold. I dropped the note like it had burned me and backed away from the car. I looked around, my flashlight sweeping across the desert. But there was nothing. No one. just darkness and silence. I didn't know who they were, and I didn't want to find out. I turned and ran back to my truck, my heart pounding in my chest, and climbed inside. I locked the doors, started the engine, and floored it, leaving the abandoned car behind. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, about 40 miles down the road. When I finally pulled over at a gas station, I sat in my truck for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. I thought about calling the police, telling them about the car and the note and the smell. But what would I say? That I found an abandoned car with a cryptic note and a bad smell. They'd probably think I was crazy. So I didn't call. I just got back on the road and drove home. But I've never forgotten that car, or that note, or the smell that came from the trunk. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through the desert, I wonder what happened to the person who wrote it. And I wonder if they are still out there, watching. I'm not picky about where I sleep when I'm on the road. As long as the bed is clean and the door locks, I'm happy. So when I pulled into the Desert Rose Motel just outside of Needles, California, at around 2 in the morning, I wasn't expecting much. The place looked like it had been built in the 1960s and hadn't been updated since. The neon sign out front was missing half its letters, and the parking lot was mostly empty except for a couple of beat-up trucks and a sedan with a cracked windshield. I parked near the office and walked inside. The lobby was small and dingy with fake wood paneling on the walls and a linoleum floor that was peeling at the edges. Behind the counter was an older man with thinning gray hair and thick glasses, watching a small TV that was playing some late-night infomercial. He looked up when I walked in, his expression blank. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice flat and disinterested. "Yeah," I said. "Just for the night." He nodded and pulled out a ledger, flipping through the pages. "Cash or card?" "Cash," I said, pulling out my wallet. He quoted me a price, and I handed over the bills. He counted them slowly, methodically, and then slid a key across the counter. It was an actual key, not a key card, attached to a plastic keychain with the number 7 written on it in faded marker. "Rooms around back," he said, nodding toward the door. "Checkout's at 11. I thanked him and walked back outside. The motel was shaped like an L, with the rooms arranged in a single row along the outside. I walked around to the back, counting the doors until I found number 7. The door was painted a faded turquoise, and the number was barely visible, scratched into the wood. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The room was exactly what I expected. Small, dated, and smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and mildew. There was a double bed with a thin floral comforter, a TV bolted to the wall, and a bathroom with cracked tiles and a stained sink. But it was clean enough, and the door had a deadbolt, so I didn't complain. I dropped my bag on the chair by the window and collapsed onto the bed, too tired to care about anything else. I must have fallen asleep almost immediately, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of voices. I sat up, disoriented, and looked around the room. It was dark, the only light coming from the parking lot outside, filtering through the thin curtains. I glanced at my phone. It was 3:47 a.m. I'd only been asleep for about an hour. The voices were coming from outside, just beyond my door. They were low and muffled, but I could hear them clearly. 2 people, maybe 3, talking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but there was something urgent about the way they were speaking, like they were arguing or planning something. I sat there for a moment, listening, trying to decide if I should get up and check or just ignore it and go back to sleep. But then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, walking along the row of rooms, stopping at each door. I heard the sound of a doorknob turning, then moving on to the next one. My heart started to beat faster, and I quietly got out of bed, creeping toward the door. I pressed my ear against it, listening. The footsteps were getting closer. They stopped at the door next to mine, and I heard the doorknob rattle. Then they moved on, to my door. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest, and watched as the doorknob slowly turned. I'd locked the deadbolt, I was sure of it, but I reached out and double-checked anyway. It was locked. The doorknob stopped turning, and for a moment there was silence. Then I heard a voice, low and raspy, right on the other side of the door. "I know you're in there." I froze, my hand still on the deadbolt, my mind racing. Who the hell was this? What did they want? I didn't respond. I just stood there, barely breathing, waiting for them to move on. But they didn't. They just stood there, on the other side of the door, waiting. "Open the door," the voice said, a little louder now, a little more insistent. "I just want to talk." I backed away from the door, my legs shaking. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I was in the middle of nowhere, at a run-down motel with probably no cell tower for miles. I was on my own. The doorknob started to turn again, more violently this time, like whoever was out there was trying to force it open. I grabbed the chair from the corner and wedged it under the doorknob, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The turning stopped, and I heard the voice again, angrier now. "You can't hide in there forever." I didn't know what to do. I looked around the room, searching for something I could use as a weapon. There was a lamp on the nightstand, but it was bolted down. The TV was bolted to the wall. There was nothing, just me and the chair wedged under the door and the voice on the other side, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, my back pressed against the wall, staring at the door. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voice stopped. The doorknob stopped turning. I heard footsteps walking away, fading into the distance. I waited, counting to 100 in my head, before I finally moved. I crept back to the door and pressed my ear against it, listening. Silence. Nothing but the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just sat on the bed, fully dressed, staring at the door, waiting for the sun to come up. When it finally did, I grabbed my bag and got the hell out of there. I didn't bother checking out, didn't stop to talk to the man at the front desk. I just got in my truck and drove. I've stayed in a lot of motels since then, but I've never gone back to the desert. Rose. And I always check the parking lot before I book a room. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's waiting for you on the highway. It's what's waiting for you when you stop. Truckers have a weird relationship with CB radios. Some guys swear by them, use them to chat with other drivers, get updates on traffic and weather. Others think they're relics from another era, made obsolete by cell phones and GPS. I fall somewhere in the middle. I keep mine on, mostly for emergencies, but I don't use it much. Most of the time, it's just static and the occasional trucker complaining about road conditions. But that night, on Highway 95 through Nevada, I heard something on that CB that I'll never forget. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and I was about halfway through my route, hauling a load from Reno to Phoenix. The highway was empty, just me and the darkness and the endless stretch of desert on either side. I had the radio on low, tuned to channel 19, which is the main channel most truckers use. It was mostly quiet, just the occasional crackle of static and a few distant voices, too garbled to make out. Then I heard her, a woman's voice, clear and sharp, cutting through the static like a knife. "Is anyone out there?" I glanced at the radio, surprised. It wasn't often you heard a woman on the CB and her voice sounded strange. Young, maybe in her 20s, but with an edge of panic that made my skin crawl. I hesitated for a moment, then picked up the mic. "Yeah, I'm here," I said. "You okay?" There was a pause, filled with static. And then her voice came back, a little louder, a little more desperate. "I need help. Please. I don't know where I am." I frowned, trying to figure out where she was calling from. CB radios have a limited range, usually only a few miles, which meant she had to be somewhere nearby. I scanned the road ahead, looking for any sign of a vehicle or someone on the side of the road, but there was nothing. Just darkness. "Where are you?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "What highway are you on?" "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I was driving and my car broke down, and now I can't find the road. I've been walking for hours and I can't find anyone. Please, you have to help me." My heart started to beat faster. If she'd been walking for hours, she could be miles away from her car, lost in the desert, and at this time of night, with the temperature dropping, she was in serious danger. "Okay, stay calm," I said. "Can you see any landmarks? Anything that might help me find you?" There was another pause, and I could hear her breathing, rapid and shallow, like she was on the verge of hyperventilating. "I don't know," she said finally. "It's too dark. I can't see anything. Just desert. Please, I'm so scared." "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to help you. Just stay on the radio, okay? Keep talking to me. We'll figure this out." I pressed down harder on the gas, speeding up, my eyes scanning the road ahead. If she was nearby, I'd find her. I had to. But as the minutes passed, I started to feel a growing sense of unease. Her story didn't add up. If her car had broken down, why hadn't she stayed with it? And how had she gotten so far from the road that she couldn't find her way back? The desert was flat and open. You could see for miles during the day, even at night with a flashlight or even just the light from a cell phone. She should have been able to find her way back to the highway. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep her talking. "Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name's Emily." "Okay, Emily. I'm going to find you. Just hang in there." But the more I listened to her, the more something felt off. Her voice was strange. Too clear, too sharp, like she was standing right next to me instead of miles away. And there was something else. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. An echo, maybe. Or a distortion, like her voice was being filtered through something. "Emily," I said slowly, "where were you driving from?" I don't remember," she said, and for the first time her voice wavered like she wasn't sure. "I was just driving. And then my car stopped, and I got out, and now I'm lost." "Do you have a cell phone?" I asked. "Can you call for help?" "No," she said, her voice rising with panic. "No signal. There's no signal out here. You have to help me. Please." I was about to respond when I saw something up ahead. A car sitting on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking. My heart leaped, and I slowed down, pulling over behind it. I grabbed my flashlight and jumped out of the truck, running toward the car. "Emily!" I called out, shining my flashlight around. "Emily, are you here?" No response. I reached the car and looked inside. It was empty. The engine was cold and the doors were locked. I walked around it, shining my flashlight on the ground, looking for footprints or any sign that someone had been here recently. But there was nothing. Just the car, sitting there with its hazard lights blinking, in the middle of nowhere. I walked back to my truck, confused and more than a little unsettled. I picked up the CB mic again. "Emily, are you still there?" Static crackled back at me. I switched channels, tried again. Nothing, just static. She was gone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the radio, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had she found help? Had someone else picked her up? But then why would her car still be here, locked and abandoned? I got back on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept the CB on, listening for her voice, but all I heard was static. Mile after mile, nothing but static. And then, just as I was about to give up, I heard it again. Her voice, clear and sharp, cutting through the static. "Thank you for stopping." I froze, my hands gripping the wheel. "Emily, thank you for stopping," she repeated, her voice calm now, almost emotionless. "But you shouldn't have." And then the radio went silent. I tried to respond, tried to get her back on the line, but there was nothing. Just dead air. I drove the rest of the way to Phoenix in silence, my hands shaking, my mind racing. I never heard from Emily again, and I never found out what happened to her or whose car that was on the side of the road. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through the desert, I hear her voice on the CB. Just for a second, just long enough to make my heart stop. And every time, she says the same thing. "Thank you for stopping, but you shouldn't have." I've been driving long haul for almost a decade, and I pride myself on knowing the roads. I've got a good sense of direction, and I rarely rely on GPS unless I'm heading somewhere completely unfamiliar. So when I took a wrong turn on Highway 93, somewhere between Wickenburg and Las Vegas, I wasn't too worried. I figured I'd just backtrack, find the highway again, and be on my way. But that's not what happened. Instead, I found myself on a road that didn't make sense. A road that shouldn't have existed. And the more I drove, the more I realized I might not find my way back. It started around 1 in the morning. I'd been driving for hours, and I was tired, but not so tired that I couldn't focus. The highway was dark and empty, and I was cruising along, listening to some late-night talk radio, when I saw a sign for a detour. It was one of those temporary orange signs, the kind they put up when there's construction or an accident ahead. The sign said the highway was closed and directed me onto a side road. I didn't think much of it. Detours happen all the time, especially on these desert highways where they're always doing maintenance. So I followed the signs, turning onto a narrow 2-lane road that cut through the desert. The road was paved, but barely, with cracks and potholes everywhere. I slowed down, taking it easy, figuring I'd be back on the highway in a few miles. But the miles kept passing, and there was no sign of the highway. No signs at all, actually. Just the road stretching out ahead of me, winding through the desert like a snake. I started to get a little uneasy, and I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but there was no signal. The screen just showed a blank map with a little blue dot in the middle. Me, apparently, in the middle of nowhere. I kept driving, telling myself I'd find the highway eventually. But the road just kept going, mile after mile, with no intersections, no turn-offs, no signs of civilization. Just desert on both sides, flat and empty, stretching out to the horizon. I started to notice other things too. The road didn't look right. The asphalt was old, cracked and faded, like it hadn't been maintained in years, and the lines painted on it were barely visible, worn down to almost nothing. I drove for what felt like an hour, maybe more, and still there was no sign of the highway. My unease turned to fear, and I started to panic. I thought about turning around, heading back the way I came, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the thought of driving back through that endless stretch of nothing. Or maybe it was the fear that if I turned around, I'd never find my way out. So I kept going, my eyes glued to the road, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. And then I saw it, a sign, standing on the side of the road, lit up by my headlights. It was old and rusted, the paint peeling off in strips, but I could just make out the words, "Welcome to Nowhere." I stared at the sign as I passed it, my mind struggling to process what I'd just read. Nowhere. What kind of name was that for a town? I looked ahead, hoping to see lights, buildings, some sign of civilization. But there was nothing. Just the road and the desert and the darkness pressing in on all sides. I kept driving, and a few miles later, I saw another sign. This one said, You are leaving nowhere. I hadn't seen a town, I hadn't seen anything, just those two signs, standing in the middle of the desert, marking the boundaries of a place that didn't exist. That's when I realized I was in trouble. Real trouble. This wasn't just a detour. This was something else. Something wrong. I pulled over onto the shoulder and sat there, staring at the road ahead, trying to figure out what to do. My phone still had no signal, and my GPS was useless. I was completely lost, with no idea how to get back. I decided to turn around. It was the only option I had. I put the truck in gear and started to execute a 3-point turn, but as I did, I saw something in my headlights that made my blood run cold. The road behind me was gone. Not blocked, not covered. Gone. Where there should have been asphalt, there was just desert, just sand and rocks and darkness. I sat there, staring at the empty space where the road had been, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. Roads don't just disappear, but there it was, or rather, there it wasn't. I got out of the truck, my legs shaking, and walked back to where the road should have been. I shone my flashlight on the ground, but there was nothing. No tire tracks, no asphalt, no sign that a road had ever been there. I turned and looked ahead. The road was still there, stretching out into the darkness. I had no choice. I got back in the truck and started driving. I didn't know where I was going or if I'd ever find my way back, but I couldn't just sit there and wait. So I drove. Mile after mile, the road stretched on, unchanging, endless. I lost track of time. It could have been hours, or it could have been minutes. All I knew was that I had to keep moving. And then, just when I thought I'd be driving forever, I saw lights. Real lights. Not just the faint glow of stars, but the bright, artificial lights of a town. I almost cried with relief. I sped up, racing toward the lights, and a few minutes later, I emerged onto a highway. A real highway, with signs and lane markings and other cars. I pulled over onto the shoulder and sat there for a long time, just breathing, trying to process what had just happened. I checked my GPS. It showed that I was on Highway 93, just a few miles north of where I'd taken the detour. According to the map, I'd only been off the highway for maybe 20 minutes, but I knew that wasn't true. I'd been driving for hours, lost on a road that led nowhere, a road that had disappeared behind me. I've driven that stretch of highway dozens of times since then, always during the day. I've never seen that detour sign again. I've never seen that road. It's like it never existed. But I know it did. I know I was there, on that road in that place called nowhere. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through the desert, I wonder if I'll see that sign again, and I wonder if, this time, I'll be able to find my way back. Some roads don't lead anywhere. Some roads just exist. In the spaces between here and there, in the darkness where logic doesn't apply. I've learned that out here, in the desert, the rules are different, and if you're not careful, you might find yourself on a road that doesn't show up on any map, a road that goes on forever. A road that leads to nowhere. Thanks for listening. And if you're driving through the desert tonight, keep your eyes on the road. Don't take any detours. And whatever you do, don't stop for anyone waving on the side of the road. Because out here, in the darkness, you never know who or what you might find.